afternoon and welcome to this special edition of IBA News reviewing the top stories of the week. Joining me in the studio throughout the broadcast is Ambassador Alon Liel, former Director General of Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thanks for joining us, Ambassador.
Thank you for having me.
We open with a stabbing attack in Tel Aviv a short time ago. 2 people were killed and 2 others seriously injured when a Palestinian terrorist stabbed them inside the Panorama office building located on the city's Ben Tzvi Boulevard. The assailant, a 24-year-old Palestinian from the West Bank village of Dura, was caught and neutralized by police forces and is said to be moderately injured. Initial reports said a second assailant suspected of aiding the terrorists escaped the scene, but police just issued a statement saying that there was no indication that a second attacker is on the loose in Tel Aviv. No doubt this week was overshadowed by the multi-pronged terror attacks in central Paris on Friday, November 13th. The international community strongly condemned the incidents and expressed support for France, as cities across the world stepped up security in response to the killings. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu urged world leaders to unite in the common battle against Islamic terrorism.
Israel stands shoulder to shoulder with France in this common battle against militant Islamic terrorism. I've instructed Israel's security and intelligence forces to assist their French counterparts and their counterparts from other European countries in any way possible. Innocent people in Paris, like those in London, Madrid, Mumbai, Buenos Aires, and Jerusalem, are the victims of militant Islamic terrorism, not its cause. As I've said for many years, militant Islamic terrorism attacks our societies because it wants to destroy our civilization and our values. I call on the entire civilized world to unite to defeat the plague of worldwide terrorism.
Ambassador Liel, amid the recent terror attacks, and as we see in Tel Aviv today, it's ongoing, the Prime Minister sort of had a statement that could have been seen to say, now you see what we're facing. Do you think this is the right message to put out from Israel?
Look, I think definitely when you do so, you are accumulating some points in Europe. There are more people in Europe that tend to make these comparisons and see Israel facing Islamic terrorism and so on. I think the question is not if it's correct to do regarding our information campaign, but if it's really the case. And the case is different. We have violence, we have terrorism, but the background is different. In France, you know where the borders are, you know who the population is, you know who is a citizen, who will be a citizen, who will not be a citizen. Here things are very unclear regarding the future, and there is a big question mark as to how this Israeli-Palestinian conflict is headed to. So the background is different. The result, unfortunately, of people injured and people killed is the same.
Israeli officials were quick to denounce the Swedish foreign minister for her statement, which would sort of link the attack in Paris with Palestinian despair. Yeah. What do you think about that?
I think that both sides, not the Israelis and not the Europeans, should compare. I think nobody is gaining from the comparisons. So, and I think that those here who are comparing, when it's coming back from Europe, have less reasons to complain. So I think first of all, terror is terror. You should fight terror. But when you look at the background, if this kind of terrorism, if this conflict, if you want, is endangering the future of France, or if it's endangering the future of Israel regarding its character, its democracy, it's very different.
We're going to continue our conversation, but now we're going to move on to other news. Despite this afternoon's attack in Tel Aviv, it was relatively a calm week in Israel this week. Security forces remain on high alert throughout the country and in the West Bank, and authorities are urging civilians and soldiers to remain vigilant. On Wednesday morning, forces managed to foil an attempted stabbing attack near the Cave of the Patriarchs in Hebron. A 16-year-old suspect was arrested and no one was injured. On Sunday, security forces arrested a Palestinian suspected of carrying out Friday's deadly attack on a family near the West Bank settlement of Otniel. Rabbi Yaakov Littman and his 18-year-old son Nathanael were both shot dead by gunmen as they, along with 5 other family members, were on their way to a pre-wedding affair for their eldest daughter, who was slated to be married Tuesday. Terrorists opened fire at their vehicle not far from Hebron and managed to flee the scene. A third family member, aged 16, was lightly wounded, and the mother and 3 daughters who witnessed the attack suffered shock. The 2 slain victims were laid to rest Saturday night. Hundreds attended their funeral, including President Reuven Rivlin, Jerusalem Mayor Nir Barkat, and Chief Rabbi David Lau. In related news, as part of its attempt to clamp down on terrorism, the cabinet this week decided to outlaw the northern branch of Israel's Islamic movement, which it claims has played a central role in the recent terror wave sweeping the country and ongoing incitement against the Jewish state. Netanyahu issued a statement saying the northern branch seeks to undermine Israel and that the movement that incites to violence against innocent civilians, cooperates closely with Hamas, and seeks to replace Israel with a caliphate. Tuesday's decision follows weeks of marathon deliberations on the matter, which began in September when the current wave of terrorism erupted.
The State of Israel must serve as an example in the battle against Islamic extremism. We saw how it massacred innocent people in Paris, New York, Madrid, and in Israel. The Islamic movement, Hamas, ISIS, and the other terror organizations have a joint platform which brings about terror around the world, as well as the wave of terror in Israel. It is high time for Israel to use all the tools at our disposal in the war against terror and the inciters who encourage this war, and this is exactly what the Islamic movement are doing.
The decision to ban the northern branch of the Islamic movement has sparked much anger among local Arab community. Joint List Chairman Ayman Aouda threatened severe consequences over the move, which he claims constitutes racism. He charged the decision was politically motivated and that it would severely hurt Israel's Arab population. The Higher Arab Monitoring Committee today led a general strike in the Arab sector to protest the decision, as well as a series of demonstrations in the north of the country. The strike was only partially observed, and major protests are scheduled to take place in the country again on Saturday.
Benjamin Netanyahu and his government are mainly responsible. They are the responsible side for the deterioration, the confrontation, the escalation. There is a group called Lehava in Israel. They are committing crimes, hate crimes, racist group. They burned up a school in Jerusalem, and the cabinet rejected the idea to outlaw this racist and extremist group. This is a pure discrimination, and we will continue to go together with the Islamic movement as an integral part of the Arab leadership in the High Committee of the Arab Minority.
Ambassador, what do you make of this decision, the timing of this decision? Do you think this was done when the whole world is focusing on the terrorism in Paris, that perhaps Israel could get away with this?
No, it was announced now. It was done about 2 weeks ago, and obviously there is probably quite a lot of evidence. I don't know, it was not shown exactly to the public at this stage, but the government speaks on a lot of evidence of activities of incitement, and maybe even more than incitement. And if such evidence will be proved, they should be outlawed. I think the evidence should be carefully examined, and everybody who is involved in terrorism or preaching for terrorism should be outlawed.
Well, now that the West is focused on this, intensifying this sort of crackdown on Islam organizations, do you think that Netanyahu will be less likely to be criticized from abroad for taking these actions?
Because of the timing? Yes. First of all, because the world is busy, Europe is busy with its own problems, and also I think there'll be more understanding for such a move. Although hopefully the terrorism in Europe will stop and Europe will come back to the agenda, the regular agenda, its regular agenda supporting peace between Israel and the Palestinians, and then it will be re-examined. Now, definitely less criticism.
And yet the Shin Bet said it recommended not to take this move, perhaps because they would go underground. Do you think this was the wise thing to do? Was this a democratic thing to do?
Obviously, I don't have the information that Shin Bet is having, and I don't have the information that the government is having. If really this public, and I understand that thousands people are speaking on 10,000 members in this movement, if they will be pushed too much to a corner without being given any hope they might end up as our ISIS. And but these are professionals have to deal with it, I think, and not somebody like me who is out of government, doesn't have the information, and is just guessing.
Thank you. In other news, it has been revealed that the Shin Bet Security Service has arrested 6 Israeli Arabs who plotted to join the Islamic State, ISIS. The 6 are from Jaljulia, east of Karsava, and were caught after one of their cellmates succeeded in crossing the border into Syria from the Golan Heights in a paraglider 3 weeks ago. That paragliding incident led to the exposure of the cell. Dozens of Israeli Arabs and Palestinians have already joined the ranks of ISIS in Syria and Iraq, and the Israeli security apparatus is concerned that they will return in one way or another to carry out attacks here. We see more in this report. The world is no longer dismissing ISIS. In Israel, too, they are starting to internalize that this isn't just a gang that beheads people in front of cameras, but is a terror organization with long arms and deep pockets, heavy weaponry, and hundreds of thousands of fighters who adhere to its Salafist ideology. Among their supporters are no few Palestinians and even Israeli Arabs. Dozens of them have sneaked over the border, mainly via Turkey, to join their ranks.
There's a very clear Palestinian presence, so to speak, in ISIS. There has also been at least one cell, which we are now aware of, which has been arrested, as you know, by the Israeli authorities for planning to join ISIS and then carry out terrorist attacks inside Israel and the West Bank. So, you know, ISIS is here to some degree, and certainly Palestinians and Israeli Arabs are there, you know, fighting with the Islamic State.
The problematic link between Israeli Arabs and ISIS is very worrying for the Shin Bet. An internal document that Mabat TV recently uncovered shows that ISIS already has cells operating in Israel. Israeli Arabs have set up links with ISIS in Syria, including logistical and operational aid to carry out attacks in Israel.
The whole Palestinian issue is of less importance to them, in fact. They call for the Palestinians to carry out attacks, but they don't really offer them anything in practical terms. They don't have, in the immediate future, as far as we can see, any intention to get involved directly in the war against Israel.
In the past weeks, the deadly terror organization has also released a video in the Hebrew language with a clear and deadly message. Israel too is in their sights.
אנחנו באים לכם מכל העולם לשחוט אתכם כמו הקפצים.
For the IDF, it's not a question of if ISIS will attack, but when and how, by land, air, sea, or by a variety of infiltration methods. ISIS has proven its capabilities and its motivation for striking Israel is high. It could be that Israeli Arabs or Palestinians who have embraced their ideology will lead these attacks, and the warning lights are already flashing. The Paris attack is another sign that indicates the Islamic State has graduated to the business of international terrorism. This according to Dr. Jonathan Spire, who's the director of the Rubin Center for Research in International Affairs at the IDC in Herzliya.
My sense is that ISIS was already on the world map in the sense that what this Paris attack was, in retrospect, so to speak, was the latest in a whole series of attacks that ISIS have been carrying out, you know, not within the borders of Syria and Iraq, in other countries since the summer, really beginning with the bombing in Suruc, you know, just close to the Syrian-Turkish border, and then in Ankara, and then the Russian plane cyanide appears, and then in Beirut in recent days, and now in Paris. So it's a string of attacks which indicate that ISIS is no longer operating as it had been operating, primarily as an organization looking after its own territorial holdings in Syria and Iraq, but has now graduated, so to speak, into the business of international terrorism.
So what's going to happen now?
In Western European countries, which have been overwhelmed, you know, by hundreds of fighters, or in the French case, over 1,000 fighters going to volunteer with IS. That's going to be very, very difficult for the security services in those countries, in countries which are not, so to speak, on a war footing, which do not perceive themselves to be at war, and where the resources are not necessarily made available to the security services to deal with these problems. Hundreds of guys coming back at a certain stage. It's going to be an enormous problem, and it means, of course, that, you know, further incidents, unfortunately, like the ones that we just witnessed in Paris, are a very, very real possibility, or even probability, in the period ahead.
It appears that Syrian President Bashar Assad now comes out as the winner.
Yeah, I think to some degree he will be, and I'll tell you why, because there's already a statement come out from the G20 from UK Prime Minister David Cameron, where he said this quite odd statement which sounded very optimistic. He said, well, you know, we've reached agreement now between Russia and the Western countries on the need to jointly fight against ISIS, which of course sounds great. He was trying to put a nice spin on it. What that actually means, of course, is that they've reached agreement that Bashar Assad is not going to be a problem. It's not a victory for the West, it's a victory for Russia and Assad, because it means that the West have agreed, yes, that our enemy is IS, our enemy is no longer Bashar. They apparently have no problem with the fact that Russia is in there keeping Bashar in his seat. So absolutely, from his point of view, the Paris attack and the fact that it galvanizes attention, which was already more focused on IS than him, galvanizes attention on IS, removes attention from the atrocities that he's committing on a daily basis. Absolutely, he comes out of it very well.
Israel is saying it doesn't have a dog in this fight, so is this good for the Jews or bad for the Jews?
Well, Israel, it's not quite accurate to say Israel doesn't have a dog in the fight, in the sense Israel has clear interests. It doesn't have an obvious side to back in the Syrian war, but because it's kind of opposed to both of the combatant sides, because they're both opposed to Israel. But it has interests. First of all, the interest to keep the border area east of Quneitra crossing safe, and it appears the interest is perceived as the need to keep the regime and Hezbollah and Iran away from that border. This is one. And secondly, the apparent need to prevent arms transfers from Syria to Hezbollah, or at least to prevent them insofar as it is possible. And we hear there's been Israeli action of that kind also in the last 3 or 4 years. So Israel has interests, but it doesn't have an obvious side to back in this fight.
So it's good for us right now.
Well, in a certain sense, in a certain sort of cold-blooded sense, if organizations committed to Israel's destruction and wishing to actively engage in promoting that end are busy currently slaughtering one another in Syria, there's only 24 hours in the day, so to speak, so then they have less corresponding time to act against Israel and the Jews.
Palestinian incitement and anti-Israel propaganda is continuing. According to the Palestinian Media Watch, an Israeli NGO that studies and analyzes Palestinian society by monitoring its media and school books, the main Fatah party has published on its official Facebook page cartoons insinuating that Israel was behind the terror attacks in Paris. Even though ISIS has claimed responsibility for the attacks, the official PA Daily issued an op-ed stating that Israel's Mossad was behind them, citing the recent approval of EU guidelines for labeling products from the settlements as the main motive. Well, widespread opposition continues to the European Union's approval of new guidelines for labeling products manufactured in Israeli settlements in the West Bank. One local group is trying to combat the move by taking products from Judea, Samaria, and the Golan Heights directly to the consumer. It's called Lev Ha'olam, and earlier this week I visited with them. While efforts to single out products from Judea and Samaria and the Golan Heights have gained steam, others see it as an opportunity.
We are trying to fight the BDS movement and all the anti-Semitic winds who are trying to demolish Israel and the Zionist, the only Jewish state in Israel. And we help the small businesses all over Israel, and especially in Judea and Samaria, in the Golan, in the Galil, in the Gaza Strip, to mark their products and to sell more. They boycott and we are selling more, and people are buying more. They spread hate and we spread love.
Lev Ha'olam founder Nati Rome lives in the community of Shiloh in Samaria. A lawyer by training, Rome set up Lev Ha'olam to push products from the territories. You have things like argan oil and tahina, candles, chocolates. What is it you tell? You can buy this anywhere in the world. So what are you telling these people when you go to them why they should buy these Israeli products?
Okay, so first of all, we are giving them a taste of Israel. We are giving them a taste of the pioneers in Israel who are doing this with a lot of love in the Holy Land, in a very with a lovely way, in a handmade. The majority of our products are handmade, organic. And we also do that because people want to support us. We are surrounded by millions of people who are trying to demolish Israel and to boycott and label our products as 70 years ago. And there are many people, grassroots people all over the world who support Israel, and we are establishing connection with them. And they are buying these products because they want to show their support.
For $100 a month, you can get a box filled with goodies and products made by small businesses in Judea, Samaria, and the Golan Heights. It varies from month to month, so each box is a surprise.
Lately we have a guy from Iran. This is a very unique. We have Papua New Guinea, we have Australia, New Zealand, Sweden, Norway, England, Italy, French, all over the world. We are labeling now, since the EU labeled our products and want to boycott our products, so we are labeling with these stickers. This product is made with love in Judea and Samaria, in the Golan and the Galil, and all over Israel.
Christian Dutch activist Ariana Kloos explains why she is so passionate about the Lev Ha'olam business venture.
For me, like, every product is a story. You know, behind every product there's a name, there's a family, there is a livelihood. Like, it's so much more. It's such a deep connection. And we really feel that all the customers who are part or our partners in Lev Haolam, this is what they want. They want to be connected to the people of Israel. The deep connection, like buying the products but also telling the truth. This is for me very important. And I hope that many people will join us. Like, I cannot say enough, especially now, that we have to do something. Like, we cannot bow for BDS or for the European Union. Like, we have to stand up.
We have Jews and non-Jews, we have religious and non-religious, but the common thing of everybody, it's that they love Israel and they support Israel, and they decided to stand up and to do something actively against all the anti-Semitic winds and all the labeling and all the bad thing that in the international pressure against Israel.
Ambassador Liel, you seem to be singing a different tune. You're a proponent of this labeling.
Look, first, if the products of the settlements are so popular, so labeling should help them. I don't know why people are complaining. No, but it's very unpopular in Israel today to support labeling. But I see it as a very necessary move. In the last decade in Israel, even 2 decades, the word peace has faded away, and the efforts for peace are gone. And as you see the publics on both sides, with the violence going on, these 2 sides to the conflict cannot manufacture an agreement, cannot move toward peace. And there is a huge effort, of course, on both sides to promote their narrative. And part of our narrative is that there is no green line, that an effort to erase the 1967 line. And I think that if we do not have this line as a base, we will never be able to draw a border between Israel and the Palestinians, because if you don't have this line, where do you start? And I think the labeling is bringing us back, or forcing us to think about the line, to draw the line again, and it's bringing us to a certain beginning. And I think without this labeling move, without demand of the international community to create a Palestinian state, to have a 2-state solution, it will not happen.
But some people are saying that the Palestinians who are working in these settlements, producing these products, they're the ones who are going to suffer from this.
Look, I don't know if you remember, but I am a South African graduate. I was the ambassador to South Africa. And this was the claim of the whites, of the apartheid regime. Sanctions, disinvestments on South Africa, the blacks will suffer first. And they supported it, and Mandela supported it. Because if you want to achieve your freedom, you have to pay a certain price, economic price, because otherwise there is no end to it. And I agree that many Palestinians are worried, but the blacks in South Africa were worried too. The question,
but don't you see that this is also opening the way to boycotting all of Israel?
No, I don't think so, at all. This labeling is not a boycott of Israel. The West Bank is not a sovereign Israeli territory, as you know. There are now demands of ministers to annex it. If we annex it, let's see what will happen internationally. But it is not Israel. It is not a sovereign Israeli territory. And the decision to label it is not relating at all to Israeli products, to products manufactured inside Israel.
You sound like you're losing your optimism. You no longer believe that the 2-state solution is viable?
Look, this question is so painful for people like me who always believed that it's possible. We're very close to the point that it will not be possible. And this is the nightmare. If we will not be able to establish a Palestinian state and live in a 2-state situation, we have a 1-state situation. And then you're faced with a question if you give the 4 million Palestinians citizenship. And unfortunately, knowing Israel, being born here, living here, I have the feeling that Israel will not grant citizenship to these 4 million Palestinians. And then we're in a terrible situation of losing our democracy.
Ambassador Liel, please stay with us. Thank you. The cabinet this week paved the way for some 9,000 Ethiopians of Jewish descent known as Falashmura to immigrate to Israel. The group, which is believed to be the last of the remaining descendants with an affinity to Israel, will be allowed in over the next 5 years. Many of the originally Jewish Falashmura were forced to convert to Christianity hundreds of years ago. Because they were not considered Jewish, they were not eligible for citizenship, even though many have Jewish relatives among the Ethiopian community already living in Israel. Once they arrive, the new immigrants are slated to undergo a conversion process under the auspices of the ultra-Orthodox Chief Rabbinate. The decision is considered groundbreaking since the government 2 years ago announced that it had completed bringing the Ethiopians of Jewish descent and asserted there were none left in Ethiopia. There are currently over 135,000 Jewish Israelis of Ethiopian descent living in Israel, over a quarter of whom were brought here with the help of the Interior Ministry and the Jewish Agency. Also this week, the country's newly appointed police commissioner has given the true meaning of the expression break a leg. Just 1 day before he was slated to be sworn in as the next police chief, Ronnie Ashlech fell and broke his leg. Ashlech was sent to take over the post this week from acting police commissioner Ben Sisao, who now remains in charge until Ashlech recovers. After serving as the former deputy head of the Shin Bet security agency, Ashlech was approved by the cabinet in October and has spent the last month learning and preparing for his job. His training period actually began as police forces were battling daily terror attacks across the country. All events scheduled in his honor have been postponed until he is well enough to get back on his 2 feet. In Lod, a rare, magnificent mosaic from 1,700 years ago has been uncovered 20 years after its sister mosaic was revealed in the same area. The mosaic floor was part of a huge Roman-era villa. 2 decades ago, archaeologists uncovered one of the most beautiful and delicate mosaic floors ever discovered in Israel, and the display has been traveling around the world, exhibited at top international museums. This week, the Israel Antiquities Authority revealed a second part of the mosaic. It was part of the inner courtyard surrounded by columns. It is made up of medallions with depictions of scenes of wild animals, birds, and fish. The villa was never destroyed, rather simply built over, thus preserving it for us to see. The public will be able to view the mosaic in Lod tomorrow, but after that, it will be covered until a permanent structure can be built to protect it. Well, that brings us to the end of this special weekly edition of the IBA News. I'd like to thank Ambassador Alon Liel for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're actively working to resume a daily bulletin in the upcoming weeks. In the meantime, we encourage you to let us know what you think. Please send us your comments to ibaletters@gmail.com. That's ibaletters@gmail.com. We leave you now with images of the walls of Jerusalem's Old City this week, as they were lit up with the colors of France's red, white, and blue national flag in a show of solidarity following the deadly Paris attacks. I'm Aryeh O'Sullivan, wishing you a good evening, a good week, and a shalom from Jerusalem.